Welcome to Boring Money, Rich Life. I'm your host, Joy Hicks, and I made a previous video where I was telling you guys that I will kind of like break down a few more of the stock exchanges. So we're going to kind of follow up on that video. It was about like 2 videos ago. So, kind of diving back into what I was talking about with that one. So, I was letting you guys know that stock exchanges are pretty much like an infrastructure or like a marketplace where different stocks can be purchased and sold. And so I was kind of talking about the New York Stock Exchange on that one. And the New York Stock Exchange is pretty much like the most well-known stock exchange, just because, of course, like Wall Street, right? So it's very, very well known. A lot of very well established companies are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And you really don't need to know like everything that there is to know about different stock exchanges or what companies are traded on them in order to buy stock. But I did share with you guys that I am reading a book and it's called The Money School. And I shared it with you guys on my previous video. And it's pretty much just going through everything that we should have learned about money in school that wasn't taught. Just because, especially here in the US, like financial literacy is really not taught. Although it's something that we all need, like we all need money, we all use money on a daily basis, it's not something that's really taught in school. So this book, it's kind of just giving like a high overview of the different things that we should have learned about money during that time. So I'm reading it just to like refresh my memory, learn about different things. That's really the only reason why I'm kind of like going through to understand these different nuances is just because like I definitely want to deepen my knowledge. So, like I said, the New York Stock Exchange, that one is pretty much the most well known. It's definitely for more like well established companies. And within the New York Stock Exchange, there will be like different types of companies that are traded within that. So they could be within like healthcare, technology, energy, finance. So kind of think of like General Electric, Coca-Cola, JP Morgan Chase, AT&T, like these very well-known companies. They tend to be traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Now, we also have the NASDAQ, and the NASDAQ is primarily comprised of high growth tech companies. So think of like Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, even like Google. Those are the type of companies that you tend to see on the NASDAQ. And what was kind of interesting because I did share with you guys that Klarna, they did their IPO and technically they are a tech company. So I was kind of thinking they would have IPO'd on the NASDAQ, but they actually IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange. And I was kind of reading about their CEO and he was saying that he definitely, wanted to show them as being kind of like a leader in their industry. So to them, it was very important for them to be traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And then we also have SIBO, and they are a global exchange that offers like options and futures on different like equities and stocks. And then we also have CME, which also offers different like futures and options, but they do it for a larger or like a more diverse asset class. So that can be in things like agriculture, energy, metals. I think it was even saying like cryptocurrencies. So it is a lot more diverse. And then apart from just like the exchanges, which again, you don't really need to know about exchanges in order to buy stock. You really can just go on like a brokerage account. But there's also different stock indexes. And so with the stock index, those are kind of used to measure different performance or different like stock performance that you'll see. So when you're listening to like finance news and they're kind of monitoring how well stocks are doing that day, whether they're up, whether they're down, they're actually talking about the actual stock indexes. And so the NASDAQ is technically an exchange and it's also an index because a lot of different like financial professionals, they'll use it to kind of gauge where the different technology stocks are or how they're doing. So they'll definitely watch it since it is comprised of so many different like high growth tech companies. It's definitely used to kind of track that different sector in technology. And then we also have the Dow, and that's tracking the 30 largest companies. And these stocks are considered to be kind of like those blue chip type of companies. So think of like a Coca-Cola or something like that. You know, that's kind of what the Dow is tracking, those pretty large, well-established companies. And then we also have the S&P 500, which tracks 500 of the largest companies and their overall performance as well. Now, when you think of like diversification, sometimes people will invest in different like funds that kind of mimic the S&P 500 because technically they're investing in this fund that is pretty much buying different shares of these large 500 companies. And the good thing about the S&P 500 is that when a company is no longer performing or it's gone bankrupt or something like that, then it's no longer a part of the S&P 500. So a lot of times people will invest in these different funds that mimic the S&P 500 to kind of diversify. That's one way of doing it. And then, of course, you can also diversify by buying different types of assets as well. But that's sometimes like in the finance world when people think of like diversifying in stocks, a lot of times they'll kind of mimic the S&P 500. So, as I read this book, I will continue to share different like nuggets or different things that I feel like might not be common knowledge for everybody. I'll continue to kind of like pull those things out because that's really what drew me to this book. I feel like it's really cool that she's kind of like taking the time to break down certain things that people might not have known. Like the Dow, the NASDAQ, like we hear those terms so often, but you might not have known exactly what it does or whether it's an index versus an exchange or what it's looking at. So as I continue to read through it, I will definitely keep sharing like bits and pieces of what I'm learning and what I'm reading. And as always, what is one boring thing that you can do today to start fueling your rich life? Again, I'm your host, Joy Hicks. Thank you for watching and be sure to like and subscribe.